My name is Dot Williams, 70 years old today, standing in the dust of a forgotten road in rural Montana. An hour ago, my son Benjamin drove away with my life in his rearview mirror. 2 days ago, we buried my husband Richard. 40 years of marriage ended with a whisper, not the scream I had expected. But as I watched my son disappear over the horizon, I felt something unexpected bloom inside me. Not despair. Freedom. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button. From the outside, we were the perfect American family. Richard, Benjamin, and I lived in a beautiful 2-story colonial house on Maple Street in Clearwater, Montana. The kind of home with a wraparound porch where neighbors would stop by for lemonade on hot summer days. Richard owned Williams Hardware, a chain of stores that started with just one location 40 years ago when we were newlyweds. Everyone in town knew Richard Williams, the self-made businessman who built an empire from nothing but hard work and determination. At least that was the story we told. I met Richard when I was 28, working as an accountant at a small firm in Billings. He was handsome, ambitious, and swept me off my feet with grand promises of the life we would build together. 6 months later, we were married, and I left my career to help him open that first hardware store. I kept the books, ordered inventory, and greeted customers with a smile, while Richard handled the sales and expansion plans. A business needs a man's touch, he would say, whenever I suggested changes. You just focus on making this place welcoming for customers. Our son Benjamin was born 2 years into our marriage. He grew up watching his father command respect from employees and customers alike. From the moment he could walk, Benjamin shadowed Richard around the store, soaking up every word and gesture. By the time he was 10, he could recite every tool in the inventory and knew the profit margins better than some of our employees. That boy is going to take over the Williams empire someday, Richard would proudly tell customers while I stood smiling nearby. What people didn't see were the quiet moments at home, the way Richard controlled every dollar we spent, requiring receipts for groceries and questioning every purchase I made. The way my friendships slowly disappeared, as Richard found fault with each of my friends. "Eleanor is just jealous of what we have," he said, when I wanted to attend her birthday dinner. "Patricia only wants to get close to you because of our success." One by one, my social connections withered until my world revolved entirely around Richard, Benjamin, and the business. Last Christmas, we hosted a family dinner at our home. Benjamin brought his wife, Sophia, a kindergarten teacher, with a gentle manner and quick wit that I had grown to love over their 8 years of marriage. The tension was palpable from the moment they arrived. Benjamin barely spoke to Sophia, and she kept wiping away tears when she thought no one was looking. As Richard carved the turkey, Benjamin cleared his throat. "I have an announcement," he said, not looking at anyone in particular. "Sophia and I are getting a divorce." I dropped my serving spoon. "Benjamin, what happened? You two seemed so happy." "Ask her," Benjamin said coldly. "She never supported my work at the store, always complaining that I worked too much, just like you used to nag Dad." Richard nodded approvingly at his son while Sophia stared at her plate. I recognized the hollow look in her eyes. I had seen it in my own reflection for decades. 20 years ago, when Benjamin graduated from college, Richard immediately brought him into the family business. By then, we had expanded to 3 locations across the state. Benjamin started at the bottom as his father insisted, but within 5 years he was managing our flagship store while Richard oversaw the entire operation. The Williams men know business. Richard would boast at Chamber of Commerce meetings, "It's in our blood." No mention of how I had kept the accounts balanced, managed payroll, and handled supplier negotiations for decades. In public, I was simply Richard's wife, or Benjamin's mother. My identity had been slowly erased until sometimes I struggled to remember who Dot Williams was beyond those roles. Last year, Richard's health began to decline. His heart, always his weak spot, started giving him trouble. The doctor prescribed medication, rest, and a low-sodium diet. I cooked special meals and reminded him to take his pills, but Richard continued working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. "This business won't run itself," he would snap whenever I suggested he slow down. "Benjamin is good, but he needs my guidance." As Richard grew weaker, I found myself wondering what my life would look like without him. 40 years of marriage had left me with no career, no close friends, and a son who had grown into his father's shadow. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the ambitious young accountant I had once been. Where had she gone? Would I ever find her again? Then 3 weeks ago it happened. Richard collapsed in the office of our main store. Benjamin called an ambulance, but by the time I arrived at the hospital, Richard was gone. A massive heart attack, the doctors said. Quick and unexpected. Just like that, 40 years of marriage ended and I was a widow at 70. The funeral was held at First Presbyterian Church, where Richard had served as a deacon for 20 years. The building overflowed with mourners. Business associates, customers, community members, all coming to pay their respects to Richard Williams, the pillar of Clearwater. I sat in the front pew dressed in black, accepting condolences with practiced grace. He was a great man, people kept saying. Clearwater won't be the same without him. Benjamin sat beside me, rigid and formal in his dark suit. Throughout the service, he barely acknowledged my presence. When I reached for his hand during the eulogy, he shifted away, leaving my fingers grasping empty air. I told myself he was grieving, that men in our family had never been good at showing emotion. 3 days after we buried Richard, the family gathered at our lawyer's office for the reading of the will. I expected a straightforward process. Richard and I had created our wills together 15 years ago, leaving everything to each other and then to Benjamin upon both our deaths, simple and clean. Mr. Hargrove, our family attorney for decades, looked uncomfortable as he adjusted his glasses. Before we begin, he said, clearing his throat, I should mention that Richard came to see me 6 months ago to make some changes. I felt a chill run through me. Changes he never mentioned anything to me. Mr. Hargrove avoided my eyes. Richard updated his will to specify that the hardware stores and all business assets would pass directly to Benjamin upon his death. What about our home? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The family home has been transferred to a trust controlled by Benjamin. Mr. Hargrove continued. You have the right to reside there for 1 year, after which the disposition of the property is at the trustee's discretion. My hands began to shake. And the trustee is... Benjamin. Mr. Hargrove confirmed. I turned to my son, whose expression remained impassive. Did you know about this? Benjamin straightened his tie. Dad and I discussed the future of the family business many times. He wanted to ensure a smooth transition. But where am I supposed to live after a year? My voice cracked. There's a provision for a monthly stipend, Mr. Hargrove interjected. $1,500 for your living expenses. $1,500 a month in today's economy. The property taxes on our home alone were almost that much. The reality of my situation began to sink in. After 4 decades of marriage, I was being cut out of the life and business I had helped build. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about a day 25 years ago when I found lipstick on Richard's collar. Not my shade, not even close. When confronted, he dismissed it as a customer who had hugged him in gratitude for helping with a home repair emergency. I chose to believe him, just as I chose to believe his explanation for the late-night business calls and weekend conferences. But the incidents accumulated. A hotel receipt in his pocket for a room with a king bed when he claimed to have shared a double with his business partner. Unexplained withdrawals from our joint account. Text messages that he quickly deleted when I entered the room. 5 years into our marriage, I discovered Richard had gambled away a significant portion of our savings at a casino in Idaho. He promised it would never happen again. I believed him because I needed to, because I had already given up my career and independence. When it happened again 3 years later, I quietly took over management of our finances, creating separate accounts that he couldn't access without my knowledge. The week after the will reading, I found Benjamin in Richard's study going through the desk drawers. What are you looking for? I asked from the doorway. Benjamin jumped slightly. Just organizing Dad's papers. The business needs to keep running. The business that I helped build, I reminded him. I did the accounting for 40 years, Benjamin. I know those stores better than anyone. Something cold flickered in his eyes. Dad always said you overestimated your contribution. You were just the bookkeeper, Mom. Dad was the real businessman. His words stung like a physical slap. Just the bookkeeper, I had managed millions of dollars in inventory, negotiated loans for expansion, hired and trained dozens of employees. Without my financial management, Richard's grand ideas would have bankrupted us within the first 5 years. That evening, I overheard Benjamin on the phone in the kitchen. Thinking I had gone to bed, he spoke freely. "It's almost handled," he said to someone. "Just figuring out the best way to get rid of the old lady. Dad made sure the legal stuff is tight." My blood ran cold. Get rid of the old lady. Was he talking about me? His own mother? The next morning, I confronted Benjamin about the will over breakfast. "I want to discuss my role in the business going forward," I said, pouring coffee into his mug like I had done thousands of times before. Benjamin barely looked up from his phone. "There is no role, Mom. Dad left clear instructions about the transition. The business needs young blood, new ideas." "I'm not asking to run things," I said carefully, "but I built that business alongside your father. My expertise could still be valuable." Benjamin finally looked at me, his expression reminiscent of Richard at his most dismissive. "Let's be honest, Mom. You were never a real businesswoman. You were Dad's trophy, the supportive wife. That role is over now." Trophy. After 40 years of dedication, I felt something inside me crack a fissure in the dutiful persona I had maintained for decades. Later that afternoon, Benjamin came to find me in the garden, where I was deadheading roses, my hands working automatically, while my mind raced with uncertainty about my future. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone suddenly gentle. "This house must hold too many memories for you. Why don't I drive you to Aunt Sarah's place for a few days? Some time away might help you process everything." My sister Sarah lived 3 hours away in Bozeman. We weren't close, but a change of scenery might give me space to think. I agreed, packed a small overnight bag, and got into Benjamin's luxury SUV, purchased with profits from the business I had helped build. The first 30 minutes of our drive passed in uncomfortable silence. Benjamin kept his eyes on the road, occasionally checking his phone at stoplights. I stared out the window, watching familiar landmarks of Clearwater fade into the distance. The town where I had spent 4 decades of my life, raised my son, built a business. "How are things at the store?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "Fine," Benjamin replied curtly. "Jackson is helping me reorganize some of the management structure." Jackson Turner had been Richard's drinking buddy for years, a slick talker with no retail experience who had always rubbed me the wrong way. Jackson. He doesn't know the first thing about hardware. "He understands business efficiency," Benjamin said. "Something you never grasped." I turned to look at the passing scenery again, noticing we had turned onto Route 15. "This isn't the way to Bozeman," I said, sitting up straighter. "Sarah's place is east of here." Benjamin's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "We're taking a different route." "What route goes through the national forest to get to Bozeman?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "Stop questioning everything I do," Benjamin snapped. "That was always your problem. Dad said you never trusted his judgment, always second-guessing his decisions." "Your father made some questionable decisions," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Benjamin jerked the car onto a less-traveled road, tires crunching on gravel. "Like marrying you. Is that what you mean?" The venom in his voice shocked me. This was my son, the baby I had nursed, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose school projects I had helped with late into the night. "Benjamin, what has gotten into you?" "Dad told me everything before he died," he said, accelerating down the increasingly remote road. "How you tried to turn the suppliers against him. How you hid money from the business. How you threatened to expose his methods if he ever divorced you." None of this was true. The reality was nearly the opposite. I had covered for Richard's financial indiscretions for years, stabilizing the business when his gambling threatened to sink us. I had never threatened him with anything. "Your father told you lies," I said quietly. "Whatever issues were between Richard and me, they had nothing to do with you." "They have everything to do with me," Benjamin shouted, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. "It's my legacy, my birthright. Dad built that business from nothing, and you tried to steal it from him." The car was now traveling along a dusty road. I didn't recognize pine trees crowding close on either side. We were deep in the national forest, miles from any town. "Where are we going, Benjamin?" I demanded, fear rising in my throat. He remained silent, jaw clenched, as the car bounced over potholes and ruts. Finally, he pulled over at a small clearing beside the road. Nothing but wilderness stretched in every direction. "Get out," he said, not looking at me. "What, Benjamin? This is crazy. We're in the middle of nowhere." "This is where you get off," he said, finally turning to face me. His eyes were cold, a stranger's eyes. "The house and business are mine now. You're not welcome there anymore." I stared at him in disbelief. "I'm your mother. You can't just abandon me in the forest." "You stopped being my mother when you tried to steal Dad's legacy," he said, reaching across me to push open my door. "There's a ranger station about 8 miles that way." He pointed vaguely to the east. "You can call your sister from there." "I don't have a phone," I protested. "Or money." Benjamin reached into his wallet and threw 2 $20 bills at me. "This should cover a cab. More than you deserve." In shock, I clutched my overnight bag and stepped out of the car. The moment my feet touched the ground, Benjamin accelerated away, tires spitting gravel. I stood in the swirling dust, watching my son drive away without looking back. My legs gave way and I sank to the ground beside my bag, the reality of my situation crashing over me like a tidal wave. No phone, barely any money, miles from civilization, abandoned by my own child. The sun beat down on my head as tears streamed down my face. How had it come to this 40 years of marriage, of building a life and business, reduced to sitting in the dust on a remote forest road? I had given everything to my family, sublimated my own dreams and ambitions, only to be discarded when I was no longer useful. I don't know how long I sat there, time seeming to stretch and compress, as shock gave way to grief, then to anger. The woods around me were quiet except for the occasional bird call or rustle of leaves in the breeze. No cars passed. No hikers appeared on the lonely road. As the shadows lengthened, I realized I needed to move before nightfall. 8 miles to a ranger station, Benjamin had said. But in which direction? East, supposedly. But which way was east, without a compass or a clear view of the sun through the dense trees? I opened my bag to see what resources I had. A change of clothes, basic toiletries. A paperback novel I'd thrown in at the last minute. A bottle of water. At the bottom, a granola bar and a small sewing kit. Something hard pressed against my fingers as I rummaged through the side pocket. My emergency cash. $500 I had hidden years ago after one of Richard's gambling episodes, then transferred to this bag during our last vacation. Benjamin didn't know about it. Richard never knew either. As I held the money, a strange feeling washed over me. Not relief, though, that was part of it. It was something else, something I hadn't felt in decades. Freedom. For the first time since I married Richard, I was truly alone. No husband dictating my choices. No son watching me with his father's judgmental eyes. Just me, Williams, making my own decisions. And then I realized I wasn't really alone at all. I was free. I pulled myself to my feet, dusted off my clothes, and looked around with fresh eyes. The road stretched in 2 directions. One way led back toward town, the way Benjamin had driven. The other continued deeper into the forest. Logic said to follow the road back toward civilization, even if it meant a long walk. As I walked, my mind drifted to my life before Richard. I had been independent, ambitious, with a promising career in accounting. My supervisor had been grooming me for management. I had friends, a small apartment I decorated myself, savings in the bank. Weekends spent hiking or at concerts, dating on my own terms. What had happened to that woman? She had been subsumed by Richard's bigger personality, his demands, his vision of what our life should be. Year by year, choice by choice, I had allowed my identity to be eroded until I was nothing but an extension of his will. After about 3 miles of walking, the trees thinned, and I spotted a small gas station just off the main road. A faded sign advertised Pine Ridge Gas and Grocery. Hope surged through me as I quickened my pace. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door. The interior was dim and dusty, with sparse shelves holding basic supplies. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a bun, reading a paperback. "Well, hello there," she said, marking her place in the book. "Don't get many folks walking in from the forest road." "My son dropped me off," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to make a phone call." The woman studied me for a moment, taking in my disheveled appearance and the overnight bag clutched in my hand. "Dropped you off in the middle of nowhere, did he?" Her tone was gentle but knowing. "That phone hasn't worked in years, honey. But I've got a landline in the back you can use." Her name was Margaret Stevens. She had owned the gas station for 30 years, ever since her husband died, and left her with debts and few options. As she made me a cup of strong coffee, I found myself telling her everything, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. "Men," Margaret said when I finished my story. "My Harold wasn't as bad as your Richard, but he had his moments. Left me with a failing business and a second mortgage I didn't know about. Took me 10 years to dig out of that hole." "What am I going to do now?" I asked, cupping the warm mug between my hands. "First, you'll stay here tonight," Margaret said firmly. "I've got a spare room upstairs. Tomorrow we'll figure out your next steps." That night, in a narrow bed beneath a patchwork quilt, I slept better than I had in years. No Richard snoring beside me. No need to tiptoe around his moods. Just quiet, and the distant sound of crickets through the open window. In the morning, I took stock of my resources. $500 in emergency cash, a few clothes, my Social Security card and driver's license thankfully in my wallet. But as I emptied my bag to reorganize, something else fell out. A small USB drive I didn't recognize. "What's this?" I wondered aloud, turning it over in my hands. Then I remembered. The day after Richard died, I had gone into his study to find insurance papers. His computer had been open and a notification popped up about backing up files. Without thinking, I had ejected the USB drive and put it in my pocket, intending to give it to Benjamin later. In the chaos of the funeral preparations, I had forgotten all about it. Over breakfast, I mentioned the discovery to Margaret. "My nephew has a laptop," she offered. "He's coming by this afternoon to help with inventory. You can see what's on that thing." While we waited, Margaret helped me make another important call. I had been struggling to remember phone numbers, so used to relying on my cell phone contacts. But one number came back to me clear as day. Eleanor Davis, my best friend, from before my marriage, the one Richard had forced me to cut ties with 15 years ago. The phone rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello?" "Eleanor, it's Dot Williams." There was a pause, then a gasp. "Dot, oh my goodness, is it really you? After all this time?" I explained my situation as briefly as I could. Before I had even finished, Eleanor interrupted. "I'm coming to get you. Right now. Text me the address." "I don't have a phone," I admitted. "I'm calling from a landline at a gas station." "Give me the address," Eleanor insisted. "I'll be there as soon as I can." Margaret's nephew arrived with his laptop around noon. He was a quiet young man who sat up at the small table in Margaret's kitchen while I hovered nervously. "Let's see what we've got," he said, inserting the USB drive. The screen filled with folders labeled by year going back a decade. Inside were spreadsheets, PDFs, and what looked like scanned documents. My accounting background kicked in as I scanned the files. These were financial records, but not the official ones I had maintained for the business. These were shadow books documenting transactions I had never seen. "Can you open that one?" I pointed to a spreadsheet labeled Offshore 2020. As the file opened, my suspicions were confirmed. Richard had been maintaining separate accounts in the Cayman Islands, siphoning profits from the business into personal holdings. No wonder the stores sometimes struggled with cash flow despite strong sales. I was still going through the files when a car pulled up outside. Through the window, I saw a silver-haired woman emerge from a blue sedan, Eleanor, older but unmistakable. She enveloped me in a hug the moment she saw me, her familiar perfume bringing back a flood of memories. "Dot Williams," she said, holding me at arm's length to look me over. "What on earth has been going on with you for 15 years? "A very long story," I replied, tears welling in my eyes. "One I should have told you long ago." Eleanor insisted I come stay with her in her home in Springfield, about an hour away. I thanked Margaret profusely for her kindness, promising to keep in touch, and climbed into Eleanor's car with my meager possessions and the USB drive that might change everything. On the drive to Eleanor's house, she caught me up on her life. Retired from teaching, widowed 5 years ago, 2 grown children, living out of state. She had thought of me often, she said, even tried to call a few times over the years. "Richard always said you were too busy," she told me. Eventually, I stopped trying. "I should have fought harder to keep our friendship," I said. "I let him isolate me, control me. I see that now." Eleanor reached over to squeeze my hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." Eleanor's home was a cozy bungalow filled with books and plants. She settled me in her guest room and gave me space to rest, but by the next morning I was ready to take action. Using Eleanor's computer, I began systematically examining the contents of Richard's USB drive. My background in accounting proved invaluable as I pieced together the extent of Richard's financial deceptions. For years, he had been embezzling from the business underreporting income to the IRS and hiding assets in offshore accounts, all while presenting himself as the epitome of small-town business integrity. "This is criminal," Eleanor said, looking over my shoulder at the spreadsheets. "Tax fraud, embezzlement, money laundering." "He was always so careful about his public image," I said. "The upstanding business owner deacon at church Little League sponsor. No one would have suspected." "What are you going to do with this information?" Eleanor asked. I considered my options. I could turn the evidence over to the authorities, but that would likely result in criminal charges against the Williams hardware business, potentially harming innocent employees. I could confront Benjamin, but given his recent actions, I doubted he would be reasonable. I need to understand exactly where I stand legally, I decided. And I need to connect with someone else who might have insight into what Benjamin is planning. That afternoon, I called Sophia, Benjamin's ex-wife. We had always gotten along well, though Richard had discouraged me from becoming too close to her. Now I understood why. She might have been an ally, someone who could see through the Williams men's manipulation. Sophia agreed to meet at a cafe halfway between Eleanor's house and her apartment. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. The timid, soft-spoken woman from Christmas dinner had been replaced by someone with confident posture and clear eyes. "Dot," she said, embracing me warmly. "I've been so worried about you since I heard about Richard's passing. Then Benjamin mentioned you'd gone to stay with relatives." "Is that what he's telling people?" I asked, unsurprised by the lie. Over coffee, Sophia confirmed my worst suspicions about my son. "Benjamin was planning to push you out even before Richard died," she revealed. "It was part of why we divorced. He became obsessed with taking complete control of the business. Kept talking about eliminating unnecessary expenses, which apparently included his own mother." "When did he change?" I asked, remembering the sweet boy who once brought me dandelion bouquets and homemade cards. "Where did I go wrong?" Sophia reached for my hand. "You didn't go wrong, Dot. Richard poisoned him year after year, shaping him into a copy of himself. I tried to counter that influence, but Benjamin chose his father's path." Before we parted, Sophia gave me the name of her divorce attorney, Meredith Chambers. "She's tough but fair, and she knows how to deal with manipulative men who hide assets." The next day, I called Meredith's office and secured an appointment. Her office was modern and sleek, with awards and diplomas covering one wall. Meredith herself was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I laid out my situation from Richard's controlling behavior to Benjamin's abandonment and the discovery of the USB drive. Meredith took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Mrs. Williams, based on what you've told me, you have significant legal leverage," she said when I finished. "First, Richard's will may have been executed under duress or with undue influence. Second, the financial documents you discovered could constitute evidence of tax fraud. Third, as his spouse, you are entitled to a significant portion of marital assets, regardless of how the business was structured." "What about the house?" I asked. "The will says I can only stay there for a year." "If we can prove Richard was hiding assets, we may be able to invalidate portions of the will," Meredith explained. "Also, Montana is an equitable distribution state. After a 40-year marriage, where you contributed significantly to the family business, you should be entitled to approximately half of all marital assets." For the first time since Richard's death, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't powerless after all. "There's something else you should know," Meredith added. "A source at the county records office informed me that Benjamin has already listed the family home for sale, despite the provision allowing you to live there for a year." Anger flared within me. "Can he do that?" "Not legally, no. But he's clearly counting on you not fighting back," Meredith said. "What would you like to do, Mrs. Williams?" I thought about the decades I had spent being amenable, accommodating, putting others' needs before my own. Where had it gotten me abandoned on a forest road by my own son? "I want to fight," I said firmly. "Not just for what's mine, but to stop Benjamin from becoming even more like his father." Meredith nodded approvingly. "Then let's develop a strategy. But first we need to secure copies of all relevant documents. That USB drive may be just the beginning." With Meredith's guidance, I began building my case. We made secure copies of all the files on the USB drive and stored them in multiple locations. Meredith filed preliminary paperwork, contesting the will and seeking an emergency injunction to prevent Benjamin from selling the family home. Meanwhile, I reached out to Thomas Campbell, Richard's longtime business partner who owned a minority stake in Williams Hardware. Thomas and I had always gotten along well, though Richard had limited our interactions over the years. We met at Thomas's lake house, away from prying eyes in Clearwater. I suspected Richard was up to something, Thomas admitted after I showed him some of the financial documents. The numbers never quite added up, but he had explanations for everything. I trusted him because of our friendship. "Did you know about the changes to his will?" I asked. Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "Richard told me he was updating it to ensure you were well taken care of. He said he was worried about his health and wanted to make sure you had control of your share of the business." Another lie. Another manipulation. Richard had been playing everyone against each other for years. "Benjamin has already started making changes," Thomas said, concern etching his features. "Bringing in outside consultants talking about selling the East Side location, letting go of employees who've been with us for years." "Can you help me?" I asked directly. "I need information about what's happening inside the business." Thomas nodded without hesitation. "Richard was my friend, but what Benjamin is doing isn't right. And if these financial documents are accurate, I've been defrauded too." Back at Eleanor's, I received a call from Patricia Miller, my former friend who now worked as a manager at Clearwater National Bank. We had reconnected through Eleanor, who had maintained their friendship after I was forced to cut ties. "I thought you should know," Patricia said in a low voice. "Benjamin came in yesterday with documentation to remove you as a signatory on all the business accounts. And he's been inquiring about the process for selling commercial property without full partnership approval." "Thank you, Patricia," I said. "That's valuable information." Piece by piece, I was assembling a complete picture of what Richard and now Benjamin had been doing. The hardware stores had been successful, but much of that success had been built on financial deception and tax evasion. Now Benjamin was accelerating the process, liquidating assets before anyone could stop him. Through Thomas, I learned that several loyal employees at the hardware store were disturbed by Benjamin's recent behavior. His father, for all his faults, had at least maintained relationships with staff and customers. Benjamin was coldly efficient, cutting costs and corners, without regard for the business's reputation or the livelihoods of its employees. One evening, as I was reviewing documents at Eleanor's dining table, I received an unexpected visitor. Jackson Turner, Benjamin's enabler and Richard's drinking buddy, stood awkwardly on the porch, shifting from foot to foot. "Mrs. Williams," he said, unable to meet my eyes. "I need to talk to you." I invited him in, warily keeping Eleanor within earshot in the kitchen. "I know what Benjamin did to you," Jackson blurted out. "Leaving you on that forest road. It was wrong. I told him so." "Yet you're still working with him," I observed coolly. Jackson flushed. "That's why I'm here. Benjamin is planning to sell off the inventory from all 3 stores at a massive discount to a competitor, then declare bankruptcy to avoid paying suppliers. It's going to ruin people who've extended credit to Williams Hardware for years." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because my father is one of those suppliers," Jackson admitted. "Benjamin doesn't know. Dad's business would go under if Williams defaults on what they owe." I studied him, searching for deception. "What do you want from me?" "Stop him," Jackson said simply. "I'll provide whatever information you need." With Jackson's insider knowledge and documentation from Thomas, I now had enough evidence to take more decisive action. Following Meredith's advice, I filed a formal complaint with the IRS regarding the tax fraud and offshore accounts. Then I filed legal paperwork contesting the will and seeking immediate control of my rightful share of the business and assets. 3 days later, my phone rang. Benjamin's name flashed on the screen, the first contact since he had abandoned me. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded without preamble, his voice tight with fury. "Protecting what's mine," I replied calmly, "and preventing you from destroying what your father and I built." "You'll regret this," Benjamin threatened. "I'll fight you every step of the way." "I've spent 40 years regretting my choices, Benjamin," I said. "I won't spend what time I have left doing the same. The house and business are as much mine as they were your father's. It's time you understood that." "We'll see what the judge says," Benjamin spat before hanging up. I set down the phone, hands trembling, but resolve strengthened. The confrontation was coming, and this time I was prepared. With Meredith's guidance, I developed a methodical plan to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The first step was securing temporary control of enough business assets to prevent Benjamin from liquidating everything before our case went to court. Thomas Campbell proved invaluable in this phase. As a minority partner, he had legal standing to object to major business decisions. He filed an emergency injunction preventing the sale of inventory or real estate without full partnership approval. "Benjamin is furious," Thomas reported after a tense board meeting. "He accused me of betraying his father's legacy." "You're protecting it," I corrected him. "Richard built that business to last whatever his other faults." Through Patricia at the bank, I learned that Benjamin had already started selling off company assets. 3 delivery trucks had been sold to a competitor at below market value, with the funds deposited in an account only Benjamin could access. "He's stripped the operating accounts," Patricia told me in a hushed phone call. "The business won't be able to make payroll next week." This was the opportunity we had been waiting for. Meredith immediately filed for emergency financial oversight of the business, citing Benjamin's breach of fiduciary duty. The judge, concerned about the employees who would go unpaid, granted the request, appointing an independent financial controller to oversee all business transactions until our case was resolved. Benjamin's next move was predictable but still painful. He called a staff meeting at the main store and announced that financial difficulties caused by my mother's interference would necessitate layoffs. 10 employees, many who had been with the company for decades, were terminated on the spot. I couldn't let those people suffer for my battle with Benjamin. Working with Eleanor, I reached out to each terminated employee. Using part of my emergency fund, I provided them with temporary financial assistance and promised to fight for their reinstatement. One of those employees, Luis Rodriguez, had managed the warehouse for 20 years. He had witnessed Richard's business practices firsthand and was willing to provide a sworn affidavit about questionable financial transactions he had been instructed to keep off the books. Mr. Williams would have cash deliveries that never went through the register, Luis explained as we sat in Meredith's office. Contractors would pay, but there would be no invoice, no record. Luis's testimony strengthened our case considerably. Meanwhile, I continued analyzing the financial documents from the USB drive, identifying patterns of fraud going back at least 15 years. The walls were closing in on Benjamin, and he knew it. He made one desperate attempt to regain control, reaching out to Jackson to retrieve or destroy evidence. But Jackson, now firmly in my camp, recorded the conversation and turned it over to Meredith. With each passing day, I grew more confident in my abilities, the skills I had suppressed for decades as Richard's wife re-emerged. I was still an excellent accountant, a strategic thinker, and I discovered a natural leader. The employees who had remained loyal to the Williams hardware vision rallied around me, providing information and support. Anonymous tips began reaching the IRS about the financial irregularities at Williams Hardware. I hadn't authorized this, but I suspected Thomas might have taken matters into his own hands. The resulting audit would uncover what Richard and Benjamin had tried to hide. As our court date approached, I received a visitor at Eleanor's house. Benjamin's friend Jackson arrived with new information. "Benjamin is planning to file for bankruptcy protection," Jackson reported. "He thinks it will stop your lawsuit and the financial investigation." "Bankruptcy won't shield him from tax fraud charges," I pointed out, "or from criminal charges if he's been misappropriating funds." Jackson nodded grimly. "He's desperate. He knows he's losing control." The day before our scheduled court appearance, I filed one final piece of paperwork. With Meredith's help, I submitted a comprehensive settlement offer that would allow Benjamin to retain a role in the business while acknowledging my ownership stake and ensuring fair treatment of employees and suppliers. "Do you think he'll accept it?" Eleanor asked as we shared tea that evening. "No," I said honestly. "Benjamin has too much of his father in him. He'll see compromise as weakness." "Then why offer?" "To show the court that I've been reasonable," I explained, "and to give Benjamin one last chance to do the right thing." As expected, Benjamin rejected the settlement offer without even reading it fully. He arrived at the courthouse the next morning, flanked by 2 attorneys, his expression thunderous. I sat on the opposite side with Meredith, Thomas, and Eleanor for moral support. As we waited for the judge, Benjamin approached our table, leaning down to hiss in my ear. "You won't win. Dad made sure of it." I met his gaze steadily. "Richard didn't plan for everything, Benjamin. He never thought I would fight back." The bailiff called for us to rise as Judge Harriet Coleman entered the courtroom. Stern and meticulous, she had a reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for financial impropriety. Before we begin, Judge Coleman said, "I have reviewed the submissions from both parties. Mrs. Williams, your financial analysis of Williams' hardware operations is extremely detailed. Mr. Anacles, Williams, your motion to dismiss lacks substantive rebuttal to your mother's claims." Benjamin shifted uncomfortably beside his attorney. Furthermore, the judge continued, "I have received notice that the Internal Revenue Service has opened a formal investigation into Williams Hardware's tax filings for the past 7 years. Given these circumstances, I am inclined to grant Mrs. Williams's request for equal control of the business pending resolution of all legal matters." Benjamin shot to his feet. "Your Honor, my father's will clearly states. A will potentially executed under duress or with intent to defraud does not override 40 years of marital property rights," Mr. Williams. Judge Coleman interrupted, "especially when there is compelling evidence of hidden assets and tax evasion." As the reality of his situation dawned on Benjamin, I saw something change in his expression. The arrogance cracked, revealing a glimpse of the boy he had once been before Richard molded him into a replica of himself. For the first time, I wondered if there might still be hope for my son if the damage Richard had done could be undone. But that would have to wait. First, I needed to secure my future and protect the business and people who depended on it. The judge's temporary ruling was everything we had hoped for. I was granted equal control of all business operations, with the court-appointed financial controller remaining in place to prevent further asset stripping. Benjamin was barred from making any major business decisions without my approval, and the family home was placed in a protected trust, ensuring I would have a place to live regardless of the final outcome. As we left the courthouse, Benjamin stopped me on the steps, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat in his voice had diminished, replaced by uncertainty. "No," I agreed. "It's just beginning." The final confrontation took place 3 weeks after the court hearing. I had returned to Clearwater, taking up residence in a small apartment above the original Williams hardware store. Benjamin continued to live in the family home, though the court had forbidden him from selling it. I spent those weeks immersing myself in the business, reconnecting with employees and customers, many of whom were surprised and delighted to see me taking an active role again. The financial controller had stabilized the immediate cash flow crisis, but years of Richard and Benjamin's mismanagement had left deep problems to solve. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I arrived at the store to find Benjamin waiting in the office that had once been Richard's. His appearance shocked me. Always meticulously groomed like his father, he now looked disheveled with shadows under his eyes and a rumpled shirt. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. I set down my purse and took the seat across from him. "I'm listening." Benjamin pushed a folder across the desk. "The IRS contacted me yesterday. They're expanding their investigation to include Dad's personal accounts. They know about the Cayman Islands." I nodded, unsurprised. That was inevitable once they started looking at the business finances. "Did you know?" Benjamin demanded. "All these years, did you know what Dad was doing?" I considered my answer carefully. I knew something wasn't right. The numbers never quite added up, but Richard kept me away from certain aspects of the business, especially in the later years. I chose not to push, because I was afraid of what I might find. Benjamin's expression hardened. "So you looked the other way while he committed fraud. You're no better than he was." From my purse, I withdrew a sealed envelope yellowed with age. "I want you to read something." "What is this?" Benjamin asked suspiciously. "A letter I wrote to your father 23 years ago when I discovered his first affair. I never gave it to him. I was too afraid of losing you." Benjamin stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it with unsteady hands. He read in silence, his expression changing as he absorbed my words from so long ago, my pain and disillusionment, my struggle to balance love for my child with the knowledge that my husband was not the man I thought I had married. When he finished reading, Benjamin looked up at me with different eyes. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because you need to understand that your father wasn't the hero you thought he was, and I wasn't the villain he painted me to be," I said gently. "We were just people, Benjamin. Flawed, complicated people trying to navigate a difficult marriage while raising a son." I opened my laptop and turned it to face him. "And you need to see this too." On the screen was a document I had created years ago, meticulously tracking Richard's financial discrepancies, his absences, his lies. Not to use against him, but to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that my perceptions were accurate. "I've been documenting your father's financial misdeeds for over 20 years, I explained. "Not because I planned to expose him, but because I needed to protect myself and you. I was afraid that someday his actions would threaten our security." Benjamin scrolled through the document, his face paling as he recognized dates and incidents, connecting them to memories from his childhood. The business trip that coincided with his championship baseball game. The missing college fund that Richard claimed had been lost in a market downturn. The vacation home that was suddenly sold without explanation. "He lied to me," Benjamin whispered. "All those times he said you were undermining him, trying to take control." "He lied to everyone," I said. "That was who Richard was. A man who created his own reality and expected everyone else to live in it." "And I became just like him," Benjamin admitted, his voice breaking. "I left my own mother on the side of a road. I wanted to reach out to him to offer comfort as I had when he was a child, but we weren't there yet. Too much damage had been done." "We have decisions to make," I said instead. "The IRS investigation won't go away. We need to decide how to move forward with the business, with the house, with our relationship." 2 days later, we met with representatives from the IRS, our attorneys, and the court-appointed financial controller. The options were laid out clearly: cooperate fully with the investigation, pay substantial penalties and back taxes, but potentially avoid criminal charges, or fight risking prosecution and the complete dissolution of the business. Benjamin looked to me, silently deferring to my judgment for the first time in his adult life. "What do you think we should do?" "We cooperate," I said firmly. "We make this right. We save the business and the jobs it provides, and we start over with complete transparency." The settlement conference lasted 6 hours. By the end, we had a framework agreement. Williams Hardware would pay nearly $2 million in back taxes and penalties. Benjamin and I would retain ownership, with the financial controller staying on for 2 years to ensure compliance with all regulations. The family home would be sold to help pay the tax bill, with the proceeds split equally between us. Benjamin would face no criminal charges as long as he cooperated fully with investigators and completed community service. It was more lenient than he deserved, but I didn't want my son in prison. I wanted him to have a chance to become a better man than his father had been. As we left the conference room, Benjamin turned to me. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," I agreed, "but you're still my son. And I believe people can change if they truly want to." 6 months later, Williams Hardware was smaller but healthier. We had sold 1 location and restructured operations at the remaining 2 stores. Benjamin had moved into an apartment and started therapy to address the toxic patterns he had learned from his father. I used part of my settlement money to establish the Clearwater Financial Literacy Foundation, focusing on helping victims of financial abuse gain independence. 3 times a week, I taught classes on basic accounting, budgeting, and financial planning at the community center. Many of my students were women in situations similar to what mine had been, controlled by partners who used money as a weapon. Eleanor had moved to Clearwater to be closer to me, renting a charming cottage just a few blocks from my new downtown apartment. We had dinner together, most evenings making up for the 15 years of friendship Richard had stolen from us. "You seem happy," Eleanor observed one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on her porch. "Happier than I ever remember seeing you." I realized with some surprise. For the first time in decades, I'm living on my own terms, making my own choices. My 70th birthday was celebrated with a small gathering of new and rekindled friendships. Thomas and his wife Patricia, from the bank, Margaret, from the gas station, who had traveled 3 hours to attend, and even Sophia, who had started dating a kind music teacher from her school. Benjamin came too, arriving late and standing awkwardly at the edge of the party until I waved him over. Our relationship was still healing, still fragile, but it was healing. He was trying to be a better man, and I was learning to trust again. That evening, as my friends sang happy birthday, I looked around at the life I had built from the ashes of my marriage. At 70, I had found myself again, the ambitious, independent woman who had been buried beneath decades of compliance and compromise. Richard had taught me to make myself small to accommodate his greatness. Benjamin had learned those same lessons and nearly destroyed us both. But standing on that remote road, watching my son drive away, I had discovered an essential truth: we are never truly trapped unless we believe we are. Sometimes freedom comes in unexpected ways, dressed as betrayal or loss. Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the first day of a better one. And sometimes at 70, you discover that life is just beginning. Have you ever had a moment when something that seemed like the end turned out to be a beginning? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to reclaim your power. Thank you for joining me on this path to freedom and self-discovery. Remember, your story is still being written, and you hold the pen.